Hey everyone, we're the Villains Man. I'm JVD.
And I'm Smiley, and today for Dungeons and Discussions, we're speaking about combat.
Or as you like to I can't even say.
Eloquently?
Thank you. Called it.
Engaging engagements.
And we're not talking about your mediocre, typical, boring combat, like let's roll initiative and fight, swing, spell. No, we're talking about ways to spice combat up.
Now, is this from player perspective or enemy perspective?
Well, it just all depends on how you want to do it, because there's a thing, to me, the first thing to spice up your combat is just being descriptive.
Yeah.
And a lot of people do it. Sometimes I try to get into it when I DM. Sometimes I try to get into it when I play.
Yeah.
So it's almost a...
that is one of the most enjoyable things when people describe how they do things.
Yes. And
like as a DM.
And that's something sometimes I fall away from because I get caught up in the moment of the game. Not so much being descriptive, but just what is being developed.
I always try to make every death descriptive in some way.
Yes. But with combat, to me, that is the first way to spice up your combat, kind of like your relationships. You got to spice them up. It's just description. But to me, as a DM, I like combat based on specific areas.
It's like sexting.
Yeah, pretty much. Yeah. Or it's like my favorite thing to do, and I'm very notorious for it, especially if you can ask people that I play with forever, is I like combat on a sailing vessel.
Yeah.
Because I incorporate, what used to be like balance checks, which would be acrobatics, athletics, and I like that effect at the end of the round, that especially if there's something attacking the ship, that the ship will lurch.
Yeah. Or
it'll list. And, stuff like that, spicing up combat.
Yeah.
And to me, that is what makes combat the best. Well, not just I swing my axe, I cast a spell. It's okay, Evan, every now and then, he gets notorious for wanting to spice up his own combat, like the other day where he's like, well, I'm going to jump up and do a spin kick, and you're like, well, we're all on athletics.
Yeah.
So, that's a good way to start as players, as a DM, to set up your combat to make your players think.
My favorite example of this is, again, Evan, because Evan's great about this. I wish he did it more
often,
game.
Yes.
But the first game that I DM'd for him, he played a barbarian dwarf named Mud. And in his first combat, he captured a kobold in a net and then used that kobold in a net as a club.
I could see that based on his old barbarian brute. Yeah, that sounds
like
I had
the kobold was sharing damage with whatever he swung it at, and pretty soon he was just swinging a bloody bag around.
Which is a great way for your player to improvise and spice up combat just for himself.
Yeah.
So
it's about having fun.
It is, and like I said, my favorite thing is to be in a ship, especially if the ship is also sinking.
Yeah.
Because then it adds more to combat than just fighting what's going on. It's also about survival. Well, remember the last time you had an airship?
That's what I was thinking about. Like, that was fun. Like, the whole cost, like the threat of we can be pushed off.
Yes.
But we can push them off.
Too.
Well, they have birds, but we can shoot the birds.
Yeah. So it makes you think about what you need to do. And what he's talking about is in the Ancient War Reborn. They got an airship from Cloth, which I combined Ancient War Reborn with Tyranny of Dragons and Storm King's Thunder. And you get an airship from Cloth in Storm King's Thunder. Well, and the thing was, they got attacked by one of the barbarian tribes called the Black Raven Tribe. And what they do is they fly on giant ravens, and they wanted the airship for themselves. So, how did combat start? The barbarians started leaping off of these ravens onto the ship. And to me, I don't think any of you ever thought about pushing anybody off until I tried to push them off.
But my thing was, I used the gun.
So yeah, because
I try to keep my distance a bit. Use the catapult or the ballista when I could.
Mm-hmm. And then when someone was finally pushed off, and you're like, yes, what happened? Raven snatched him up, threw him back on the ship. So they automatically had a failsafe that
my
you guys
favorite
did
part
not
of the
have.
combat, though, in all honesty, was I think it was Wesley was trying to talk to the Ravens and tell them everybody was dead.
Yeah,
but they could hear the combat going on.
and it was set up that and I set that up for each barbarian had its own raven. So if you were to disable its raven, which you guys were starting to do, were shooting these ravens.
I think we killed one as they were flying in.
Mm-hmm.
But that one raven was just doubling up.
Yes, and so, the ravens had to take an action to catch a guy. So if you were killing off the ravens, that decreased the survivability of these barbarians you were pushing off. And it got pretty intense, because if I'm pretty right, because how my combat went was, all right, as an action, you can attempt to knock someone off the railing of this ship, right? And then your reaction was to make a check, an athletics or an acrobatics, to grab onto the railing. And if you didn't, well, you were gone.
Yeah.
So, and it's just a really good way to spice combat up, because did you have fun with that?
Oh, yeah.
It was a lot of fun.
And it was tense because, like, Vuse got thrown the fuck off.
Yeah, oh man, I completely forgot that she got
and the
thrown
ship
off.
was listing whenever the captain got knocked unconscious. Mm-hmm. And her fucking useless ass fucking soldiers just walked the fuck inside.
Yeah, well, they were non-combative because there's actually ways to control the ship inside. So that was that, because non-combatants, they're just in the way, and there was not a lot of room on the ship to fight on. So just an interesting way to,
I was saying,
combat.
Like, if I would have thought about it, I would have had them get on the ballistas instead. But just to watch for ravens.
True, but that was the one thing I wanted you guys.
No, that's about, like, me as a player would have told them to do that if I would have thought about it, but I didn't.
And then, for instance, and the thing is, in the monster manual, now they do a thing that's called regional effects, or lair actions too. So those are good ways to spice up your game, which I did use towards you in the game when you fought Piernoth, with the earthquakes, magma shooting up. It's just more than regular combat. It's a way to make you think about your character placement, how your character is going to react to certain things, and what their objective truly is in combat.
I'm also thinking about giving, like, mundane creatures things like reactions.
Yes,
or something that should be the leader of the enemy force, giving it a legendary axe or legendary resistance.
Yes.
To give them a bit of a hurdle that they have to get through.
For instance, at the end of that game, which some of these half dragons were these worm speakers, there was a green one, and my favorite thing to do is change up actions that a boss has, like you said, to make combat interesting. And what the green one did, instead of spitting acid, as an action, this big splash of acid, it would use its reaction just to spittle in your face and blind you, because that, for one, for me as a DM, that's an effective way to throw my players off. Yeah. But it's also spices combat, because then as a player, you have to realize, okay, I am blinded. Yeah. Do I want to take an action to stop being blinded, because you get a disadvantage on damn near everything? Yeah. Or, do I continue to fight? Do I want to jump back out of combat and try something else? It's just a way that one little bitty effective thing really causes a lot of chaos and makes your players think.
Yeah, it's not hard to add in elements. Just things that you may want to make notes to keep track of them, make sure it's happening.
Mm-hmm. Another interesting thing is, go ahead.
Like, I'm a big fan, like, if you're having use a bunch of small things, like hyenas, have them reappear every round. Yeah. Because they're not strong enough to actually pose an actual threat unless someone gets knocked unconscious. But they're more long things. They're something that get out of hand if they're left unchecked.
Very, very true. Because
and your party has a lot of AoE potential.
Yes. And it also, it's a good way to muddle the field in different areas with combat. Yeah. Especially as a DM, if you want to make it challenging for your players to spread them out. Because that's another thing in combat. You don't have to throw everything on the table at your players at one time. Spread it out. And that was a good thing you done when we had fought the nose, because you had guys in the back. Yeah. They were backing up. They were shooting arrows at us. I mean, it's a good way to make your players think, and that's my whole thing with combat. Make your players think. For instance, when you guys were in the Skyreach Castle, and in the bottom it was all ice. And you would slide, or like when you're in the snow, none of you guys thought about covering your tracks, and that whole thing led to combat. Yeah, I mean, you're like, well, what are you gonna do? Well, I've got Rupert out, and Rupert's basically a snowplow. Yeah. So, just little stuff like that is a very interesting way to make your players have more fun. Because
it also brings usefulness to other spells that don't get a lot of, like, things like Pass Without a Trace that covers your tracks for you.
Yes. Or, I mean, even a good way to spice up your combat is skills. Yeah. A lot of times people don't ever think about using skills. And one thing, especially that you could use here in 5th edition, that seems to have gone away is deception. Because remember how you used to be able to feint? Feint used to be a
It's
skill.
now part of the swashbuckler archetype for
Is it really? Because I haven't looked at that. But I mean, but even though it's part of that, though, I mean, just in general, just
I feel like
a way
it
to
should
give
be a
yourself
thing they can
advantage.
do,
Yes,
yeah.
it should be. And I think I've even allowed that a couple times. I've
You
asked
did
for that.
for James when he was doing his like fire ring fight.
And then
Was for a rogue, having advantage is a major thing they need. They need
Yes,
to
because of
function
sneak
as their
attack.
class.
And also a way to spice up combat is one thing that I also did with James for playing Rogue. He brought up the fact that okay, well, I can Misty Step and have advantage if they don't see me and sneak attack. Well, my thing was as a DM, well, to make that interesting for you, I base that slowly on what he was sneak attacking. And for instance, I'm like, okay, if you're your basic Knoll, because you just brought him up.
Your regular Knoll.
Yeah, was not the most intelligent creature in the world. So yeah, you probably could Misty Step behind them. They'd be confused because you're in front of them, and you could sneak attack them. But if it's a well-trained fighter, for instance, I made him oppose dexterity checks, which he had a high dex. But it's the fact that a trained fighter, most of the time, if they know you're going to disappear, most people's tactics are to show up behind you. So it made him, there was an opposing check there that could also, for one, screw him.
Yeah.
Because then he's there with a guy that's going to hit harder than him.
Yeah.
So, or, he could actually try to Misty Step away later on. And that's where I would use the opposing dex check for him as his thing was to move well. Here's my thing. Are you fast enough to get that spell off before I hit you?
Yeah.
So it makes combat more interesting. I would take a swipe. If he was quick enough to get a spell off, he wouldn't get swiped at all.
Yeah.
But the thing is, in combat, just don't make it about I swing, you swing, I cast a spell. If you want to do that, go play a video game.
Yeah. But even video games, they make it interesting.
Not as interesting as you can on a table.
But they have more visual representation.
Oh yeah, that's because it's computer graphics.
But I mean, like a lot of times, like they never just have the I swing, you swing thing in a video game.
True.
And that's where they have like health thresholds for bosses where they go off and do other things. And if you want to get look for inspiration on how to make a combat interesting, play a video game. Like a lot of them do have those things that you can tie into D&D very easily.
Or to me, man, you can draw a lot of inspiration from movies.
Exactly.
I mean, there's a ton of. I grew up on action movies.
Oh yeah.
So I mean, there's a ton of different ways to, steal stuff from movies, like especially stuff like Crouching Tiger, Hidden Dragon. Well, it's from like tree branch to tree branch, which a lot of people want that, and you. Okay, for one, speaking of stuff like that, Naruto.
Yeah.
I think you can draw a lot of inspiration from an anime like that because there's so many different places fights take place at, and the environment is used almost every time. So that's a good way to do that.
The one thing that does annoy me though about a lot of animes is that after a while they say, okay, everybody can fly.
Very, very true. But you can fly is even a good way to make combat interesting.
Oh yeah, especially if only one side can at first or has a limited amount of flying they can do.
Yes.
Or if, let's say players have one person that can fly, and they're fighting 3 people that can fly, then that one person is going to have a lot of heft on them.
Yeah, it's very true. And also a good thing about fly is fly can also make your players think because if it's a magical sense of flying, dispel magic.
Yeah.
And then your player falls, and if that player is in a spellcaster, what are you going to do then? Or if your character has wings, nets, bolas. There's a lot of way to make fighting in the air very interesting.
Rule 1, if you can fly, don't fly above the tree line toward an enemy and expect them not to attack you.
Very, very true.
Yeah.
Another way to make combat interesting is, like I had mentioned earlier, with environmental effects. The cold. Cold technically should affect a player to the point where it will slow them down. That's where Constitution saves come into play. And I feel that a lot of people don't think about something like that.
That's very true. Same thing like in dark. If you're in absolute darkness without dark vision, you're effectively blind.
And which is something we just recently used. Because that is a good way to actually give yourself as a player an advantage with light.
Yeah.
It was just something we just recently encountered.
When Grom pulled the sword out, daylight was in front of everyone's face for the first time in weeks.
And everybody in our group had dark vision.
Yeah.
So you can imagine how, if you're DM.
It's just like that momentary pain you had to
Yes.
force your eyes closed.
And which could, as a DM, give you an advantage, or as a player, give you advantage. So it's just little stuff like that makes combat very, very interesting.
And also, since then, like, Evan's talking about having the sword out all the time and swinging around playing with it. So I haven't brought it back up because I'm assuming by now people's adjusted to the presence of a glowing stick.
Yeah, which basically acts as a torch, which I personally do not like as a character.
Yes.
Because I have things that rely on being in the dark. But just stuff like that makes your combat interesting. I mean, and as a DM, you should utilize that. Because here's the thing. The smallest things can take a low-level villain or monster and make it an extreme pain for a higher-level character. And it's just something simple as, well, all my players have dark vision. Oh, yeah, well, this guy just whips out daylight all of a sudden. And now you all have disadvantage, and you're all level 5, and my guy is a CR1. And it makes him very difficult
conversely, you have dark vision, but you can't see through magical darkness.
That's very, very true. That's what makes your brow effective. That's
where several specific things can really shine. Like Warlocks get the Devil Sight feature. Our Witch Hunter class, the Pact of the Shadow, can see through magical darkness to like 30 feet.
I'm waiting for a chance to use that.
You've had several.
Oh, no. I have an ideal situation to use that
that's
in mind.
nice.
Yes, I'm waiting to use it. So, but yes, I mean, like I said, little things like that make your combat interesting. And the thing is, it doesn't have to be set up in something like an airship. Or a sailing vessel on the seas, which I prefer.
Yeah.
It's just one little thing causes a lot of chaos on the table and makes things a lot more fun. Or if you're a player that hates that, you're really going to be annoyed.
One thing that I like to do that I haven't really had a chance to use it much is give the area you're in its own regional or layer effects while you're fighting in that area, where it's not tied to a creature, but just because of where you're at.
Yeah, for instance, like you'd mentioned in another video, growth, entanglement. Right there just makes combat interesting, period. Because, I mean, think about it. You as a player are going to have to find a way either around this or you have to go through. Or even if you're caught in the middle of it. That makes things very... Because here's my thing. Okay, you're entangled. I have multiple attacks. Depending on your level of entanglement, I might only give you one. I might only give you two. I mean, and then here you got somebody that's used to fighting in it. A weaker monster, but you're a higher level character, and they have a potential to beat you.
Like, let's say you're in if they infused forest fighting goblins that were raised here.
Yeah,
they're used to the way the terrain works and how it lands. They know how to avoid that entanglement where you may not. So where you're caught by these vines and this underbrush, they're just running through it, stabbing at you.
Yes, remember that when you go to chill. With that, I'm JVD.
I'm Smiley.
Keep the dice rolling, guys.